Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking some of the shocking realities and shattering a few really enduring myths about the final days of the Holocaust. We're going to take a hard look at the collapse of the Nazi regime and how they desperately tried to literally erase history, all based on the actual records and evidence they left behind. Let's get right into it.
So, by the spring of 1944, the Nazi regime was completely caught in a vice. Allied forces were closing in fast from both the east and the west. And as those front lines crept closer to the concentration camps, Nazi leadership issued this chilling directive: no prisoner should fall into enemy hands. That one single devastating order, that really set the stage for the regime's absolute darkest final chapter.
Section 1. The Collapse and the Marches. That order I just mentioned triggered what became notoriously known as the Death Marches. Basically, thousands of camp prisoners were forced out from behind the wire, put out on the open roads, and marched through brutal, freezing conditions. And if you were too sick or too weak to keep up, you were simply left right where you fell, guaranteed to die as the Allies closed in.
This just perfectly and chillingly illustrates the terrifying mindset of the SS. They actually viewed these living, breathing people as nothing more than human cargo. Cargo to be relocated deeper into the Reich for slave labor. So these marches, they were this desperate, dual-purpose strategy. They were trying to keep their enslaved workforce while at the exact same time frantically trying to hide the undeniable evidence of their crimes.
Section 2. Uncovering Auschwitz by chance.
Now here's something you might not know. The staggering discovery of Auschwitz by Soviet troops was actually a complete historical accident. Seriously, in January 1945, the Soviets had already found Majdanek in the Operation Reinhardt camps. But Auschwitz? It wasn't even on their official marching orders. They literally stumbled upon it entirely by chance on January 27th. And when soldiers like Ivan Martinuskin walked through those gates, the scene was just absolute exhaustion. The survivors they found were covered in soot and so frail that the soldiers couldn't even tell if they were looking at young kids or the elderly.
Before fleeing the advancing Soviet army, the Nazis were so desperate that they actually dynamited the camp's crematoria. It was this final, frantic, and completely futile attempt to erase the evidence of 1.1 million murders. Just think about that number, 1.1 million, in that single location alone. They tried to reduce it to rubble, but the sheer, massive scale of the horror was just way too big to hide.
Section 3. Dachau in true color. Meanwhile, as the British were pushing through northern Germany, the Americans were making their own horrific discoveries over on the Western Front. When American forces finally reached Dachau near Munich on April 29, 1945, and keep in mind, this was the camp that served as the model for the whole system, military filmmaker George Stevens was right there with them. His job was to capture the liberation, and he didn't just film it in black and white, he captured it in vivid, unflinching, true color.
But the sights Stevens recorded were so jarringly traumatic that he actually hid his films from the world. He locked this absolutely incredible historical footage away for almost 4 decades. It wasn't even released to the public until 1984. Honestly, it's a massive testament to the paralyzing shock that even battle-hardened soldiers experienced when they walked into these camps.
And to really grasp why that footage was so deeply traumatic, we just have to look at the numbers. At Dachau alone, over 200,000 prisoners passed through its gates. And of those people, the grim reality is that at least 30,000 perished right there on those grounds.
Seeing the overwhelming, almost industrial scale of these camps brings us to a deeply unsettling question. It's one that historians and everyday citizens still grapple with today. How much did the outside world, and specifically the neighboring towns, actually know about what was happening right in their own backyards? Section 4. The Myth of Mass Silence.
You see, when the camps were liberated, the American army often requisitioned civilians from neighboring towns to help with the dead and the survivors. And during this, so many of these civilians claimed total ignorance. They pretended they knew absolutely nothing about the atrocities. But the physical, sensorial reality completely shatters that claim. The historical record clearly shows that the smell of functioning crematoria blanketed their towns and was detectable for miles around. So it really wasn't a lack of knowledge, right? It was a devastating, intentional mass silence.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is the vast scale of complicity. Yes, there was a massive state apparatus of roughly 150,000 Nazis actively and directly perpetrating the genocide, but that system was ultimately enabled by millions of ordinary citizens who made the active choice to close their eyes to the state project happening right next door.
Section 5. Facing the Architecture of Evil.
Let's look at how fast this all fell apart. The final months saw an incredibly rapid sequence of events. We go from the chance discovery of Auschwitz in January, jumping to April 29th with the liberation of Dachau. Then, just one single day later, on April 30th, Hitler commits suicide in his Berlin bunker. And finally, the total surrender of the Nazi regime follows, just over a week later, on May 8th. The collapse was stunningly quick.
But here is a historical contrast that is just incredibly jarring. Adolf Hitler was the undeniable architect of this sweeping genocide. Yet historical investigations indicate he never actually set foot inside a single concentration camp himself. Not once. He engineered this vast, sprawling architecture of evil entirely from a distance, completely insulated and removed from the brutal physical reality of the slaughter he commanded.
So when the regime finally surrendered in May of '45, the liberation was a lot more than just a military victory. The entire world was suddenly forced to look right at the true, horrifying mechanics of what historians now call a macabre, multifaceted machine.
Within the camp system alone, over 3.5 million lives were violently extinguished. It truly stands as one of the absolute worst, most brutally efficient killing machines in all of human history.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to reflect on why this history matters so urgently today. The evidence we've walked through shows us the unimaginable cost of millions of people choosing to close their eyes to the truth. So, we're left asking ourselves, knowing exactly what happened back then, what is the true danger of our own mass silence today? What's the ultimate cost of choosing to look away? Really think about that. Thank you for learning with me today.